This is the story of how she bought a $5 Christmas boyfriend, never realizing he was the millionaire she dumped years ago. Hello, welcome my beautiful family. Please leave in the comments which city you are watching from. And please subscribe so you don't miss our unique love stories. Enjoy the story. The cafe door opened, and Grace Bennett's entire world collapsed. Because the man standing in front of her, the $5 Christmas boyfriend she had just purchased at a charity auction, was the same man whose heart she had shattered 8 years ago. And from the look in his eyes, he had known exactly who was buying him. Daniel. The name came out as a whisper, broken and disbelieving. He smiled. That same devastating smile that had once made her believe in forever. And then he slid into the booth across from her like this was the most normal thing in the world. Actually, these days most people call me Danny. He picked up the menu, studying it with infuriating calm. But you always did refuse to use nicknames. Said they were diminutive and dismissive. Grace couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Couldn't process how Daniel Crawford, the boy she had shattered, the relationship she had destroyed, the biggest regret of her carefully controlled life, was sitting across from her in a cafe, pretending to study the sandwich options. "What are you doing here?" she finally managed. "I believe you bought me." He set down the menu, his expression unreadable. "For $5. To be your Christmas boyfriend. We have all made choices we regret. We have all pushed someone away because we were scared. Scared they were not enough. Scared we were not enough. Scared of what might happen if we actually let ourselves love someone who did not fit the plan. But what happens when the person you rejected shows up 8 years later, and they are now worth more than your wildest dreams could have imagined?" Grace had broken Daniel Crawford's heart because he was a dreamer with no direction, a poet with no paycheck, a man her mother called a beautiful disaster waiting to happen. She had chosen security over love, certainty over chaos, and she had spent 8 years telling herself it was the right decision. But now he was sitting across from her, taller, broader, wearing a watch that cost more than her annual salary, and he was smiling that same devastating smile. Except this time, there was something else in his eyes, something that looked a lot like revenge. What Grace did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that Daniel Crawford had not just become wealthy. He had become one of the most successful entrepreneurs on the East Coast. And he had moved back to Hartwick, Massachusetts, for one reason only. But was that reason love? Or was it something far more dangerous? And when the truth finally comes out at Christmas dinner in front of her entire family, Grace will have to face the most terrifying question of her life. Is it possible to win back someone you never deserved in the first place? Before we dive into this incredible story of second chances and Christmas miracles, drop a comment below. Have you ever let someone go and later realized they were the one? What would you do if they showed up again, richer, more successful, and more handsome than ever? Stay until the end, because what happens at that Christmas dinner will leave you absolutely speechless. But to understand how Grace ended up in that cafe, staring at the ghost of her greatest mistake, we need to go back. Back to the life she had built, the fortress she had constructed around her heart, and the desperate decision that would change everything. Grace Bennett was 28 years old, and she had built her life like a prison disguised as a sanctuary. She worked at a small, cramped independent bookstore called Turning Pages in downtown Hartwick. The shelves were stacked too high, dust collecting in corners that never quite got cleaned. The wooden counter where she spent her days was worn smooth from years of transactions, and the tiny office in the back was where she ate lunch alone, every single day, surrounded by invoices and the faint smell of old paper. The Christmas decorations she had put up felt more sad than festive. A strand of lights that flickered unpredictably, a small artificial tree on the counter that leaned slightly to the left, a wreath on the door that had seen better decades. But Grace told herself it was enough. She told herself this life was safe, predictable, controlled, no surprises, no risks, no one getting close enough to hurt her. And if sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she had accidentally locked herself inside her own walls, well, That was just the price of safety. That was what she told herself every time the loneliness crept in. Every time she watched couples walk past the bookstore window, holding hands, laughing at private jokes. Every time she went home to an empty apartment and ate dinner alone in front of the television. Safety had a cost, and Grace had decided long ago that she was willing to pay it. Then her phone rang. She knew it was her mother before she even looked at the screen. There was a particular time of day when her mother always called, right around 5 in the evening, when she knew Grace would be closing up the shop and would have no excuse not to answer. "Grace, sweetheart." Her mother's voice had that particular tone, the one that mixed disappointment with hope, criticism with concern, the one that made Grace's stomach tighten instantly. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to remind you that the family gathering is this weekend. Christmas Eve dinner. Everyone will be there." "I know, Mom. I have it on my calendar. Your cousin Stephanie is bringing her fiancé. Did I tell you that? They are getting married in June. Such a lovely young man. Very successful. Works in finance." Grace closed her eyes. "Here it comes. And your brother just got engaged. I know I already told you, but I still cannot believe it. Both of my other children, settling down, building families." Her mother paused. "And you, sweetheart, you are 28 now." "I am aware of my age, Mom. It is just that we worry. You work so much at that little bookstore, and you never go out, and Great Aunt Mildred keeps asking about you. She wants to know why you are still alone. I never know what to tell her." Grace gripped the phone tighter, the familiar frustration rising in her chest. The familiar shame. "I am fine, Mom. I am happy. Are you, though? Because your father, God rest his soul, he always worried about you. He used to say you were too careful, too afraid of taking chances." The mention of her father hit Grace like a physical blow. It had been 3 years since he passed, and the wound still felt fresh. Still felt like something that would never fully heal. "Mom, I really need to go. Just tell me you will at least try to meet someone. For Christmas. It would make me so happy to see you with someone. To know you are not going to spend your life alone." And that was when Grace made the mistake that would change everything. "I will bring someone," she heard herself say. "To Christmas dinner. I will bring someone." The silence on the other end was deafening. "You will?" Her mother's voice lifted with hope. Actual hope. Like Grace had just announced she had won the lottery. "Yes, I will. I have to go now, Mom. Love you." She hung up before her mother could ask any follow-up questions. Before she could demand details about this mysterious someone. Before Grace had to admit that she had just told the biggest lie of her adult life. Because she had no one. Her last relationship had ended 14 months ago. A 3-month disaster with a man who turned out to be still technically married. Her dating apps were deserts of disappointment, filled with men who could not hold a conversation and others who held far too many opinions about things they did not understand. The only man who had shown interest in her recently was the elderly mailman who always winked when delivering her packages. She had exactly 72 hours to find a boyfriend. Grace hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, wondering how one small lie could feel so much like jumping off a cliff. She had no idea how right she was. The next morning, Grace woke up with a knot in her stomach that had not loosened even slightly overnight. 72 hours. She had 72 hours to produce a boyfriend out of thin air. A boyfriend she did not have. A boyfriend who did not exist. A boyfriend her entire family was now expecting to meet at the most important dinner of the year. She went through the motions at work. Shelving books. Helping the occasional customer. Pretending everything was fine while her mind raced through impossible options. She could fake an illness. Tell her mother she was too sick to come to dinner. But her mother would show up at her apartment with soup and concern, and the lie would unravel immediately. She could tell the truth. Admit she had panicked and lied. But the disappointment in her mother's eyes would be unbearable. The knowing looks from her cousin. The sad shake of Great Aunt Mildred's head. She could try to find an actual date in 72 hours. But where? How? She had already exhausted every option she could think of. By the time she left work that evening, snow had started falling. soft and quiet, dusting the streets of Hartwick with white. Grace walked toward her apartment, head down, lost in thought, when something caught her eye. A hand-painted sign outside the community center. She stopped, squinted through the falling snow. Read the words once, then twice, then a third time, convinced she must be misunderstanding. Rent a boyfriend for Christmas. All proceeds benefit Hartwick Children's Hospital. Grace stood there for a long moment, snowflakes landing on her coat, on her hair, on her eyelashes. She read the sign again. This was insane. This was absolutely, completely, certifiably insane. She was 28 years old, a college graduate, a responsible adult, and she was considering renting a human being for the price of a fancy coffee. But then again, her last real date had spent 45 minutes explaining why he only ate foods that were orange. At this point, a rented boyfriend could not possibly be worse. She pulled the crumpled $5 bill from the bottom of her purse. It had been sitting there for 3 weeks, wrinkled and forgotten. She stared at it, stared at the sign, stared at the community center doors. What is the worst that could happen? She whispered to herself. The universe, as it turned out, was about to answer that question in spectacular fashion. Grace pushed through the doors. The community center smelled like cinnamon and pine, a holiday fantasy brought to life with twinkling lights and donation boxes and volunteers in matching red sweaters. Grace approached the table marked Christmas Boyfriend sign-up with the caution of someone approaching a potentially dangerous animal. A cheerful woman sat behind the table, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. A smile that seemed to know things. First time? The woman asked. That obvious? Honey, you look like you are about to defuse a bomb. The woman laughed, warm and genuine. Relax. It is simple. You donate $5 to the Children's Hospital, we match you with one of our wonderful volunteers, and they accompany you to up to 3 holiday events. Dinners, parties, family gatherings. Whatever you need. Grace placed the crumpled bill on the table. I need someone who can survive my mother. The woman's eyes twinkled with something that looked almost mischievous. Then you will want Danny. He is our best. Charming, patient, and he has this way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. She pulled out a simple white card and handed it to Grace. Just a phone number and a name written in neat handwriting. Danny. He will meet you at Rosewood Cafe tomorrow at noon. Just tell the hostess you are there for the Christmas match. Grace stared at the card. At the simple name. Something about it felt familiar. Like a song she had forgotten, but could almost hum. Like a memory just out of reach. She shook off the feeling. It was probably just nerves. That is it. Grace asked. That is it. Merry Christmas, dear. Grace walked out into the snow, clutching the card, feeling equal parts foolish and hopeful. She had no idea that her $5 impulse purchase was about to unravel 8 years of carefully constructed denial. That night, Grace could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the shadows on her ceiling, the white card sitting on her nightstand like a small bomb waiting to detonate. Danny. She would meet Danny tomorrow, a stranger who had agreed to pretend to be her boyfriend for charity. She got up twice to check the card, as if the name might have changed, as if the phone number might have disappeared, as if the whole thing might have been a fever dream. By morning, she had changed her outfit 4 times. The clothes were laid out across her bed like options in some high-stakes game show. Professional, but not too formal. Casual, but not too sloppy. Attractive, but not trying too hard. She finally settled on a deep green sweater dress that her best friend Maggie had once said made her eyes look like forest pools of untold mystery. Maggie was dramatic, but Grace needed all the help she could get. As she finally drifted to sleep that night, Grace had one last thought. Please, just let him be normal. Kind. Someone who will not make this worse than it already is. She had no idea that normal was the last word anyone would use to describe what was waiting for her at Rosewood Cafe. Rosewood Cafe was the kind of place that appeared on Instagram feeds and in cozy movie sets. Exposed brick walls. Vintage holiday decorations hanging from every available surface. the rich aroma of coffee and baked goods wrapping around every patron like a warm embrace. Grace arrived 15 minutes early, which was 12 minutes later than she had wanted. She chose a corner booth, ordered a peppermint mocha she did not actually want, and waited. She checked her phone 6 times, fixed her hair 4 times, practiced casual expressions in the reflection of her spoon twice, wondered what she was doing with her life approximately every 30 seconds. The cafe door opened. A woman walked in with 2 children. Grace exhaled. The door opened again. An elderly man shuffled toward the counter. Grace checked her phone again. And then, at exactly noon, the door opened one more time. A swirl of snowflakes and cold air rushed into the warm cafe. And through the door stepped a figure that made Grace's heart stop completely. He was tall, taller than she remembered. Dark hair with slight waves she had once spent hours running her fingers through. His jaw was sharper now, more defined. He wore a simple navy wool coat over broad shoulders that spoke of years of change and growth. But his eyes were exactly the same. Deep brown, warm like honey and sunlight, with that particular way of looking at a person that made them feel completely seen. Grace's heart stopped. Then it started again, racing so fast she thought it might escape her chest entirely. Her fingers went numb. Her mouth went dry. And a single name, a name she had not spoken aloud in 8 years, echoed through her mind like a thunderclap. Daniel. He saw her. Their eyes met. And he smiled. That smile. The one that had made her fall in love with him in a cramped college basement 8 years ago. The one that had haunted her dreams for months after she left. The one she had tried so hard to forget. He walked toward her, sat down across from her, picked up the menu like this was completely normal. Actually, these days most people call me Danny. He studied the menu with infuriating calm. But you always did refuse to use nicknames. Said they were diminutive and dismissive. Grace could not speak, could not move, could not process the fact that Daniel Crawford, the man whose heart she had shattered, was sitting across from her as if they were old friends meeting for lunch. "What are you doing here?" she finally managed. "I believe you bought me." He set down the menu, his expression unreadable. "For $5. To be your Christmas boyfriend." "I did not know. I did not know it was you." "I know." His voice softened just slightly. "But I knew. When I saw your name on the sign-up list." The ground shifted beneath Grace's feet. Everything she thought she understood about this moment, this situation, this bizarre charity program, rearranged itself into something far more complicated. "You saw my name, and you still signed up to be my match." Danny looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Something old and hurt and hopeful all at once. "I moved back to Hartwick 3 months ago. Thought it would be a nice way to give back to the community. And then I saw your name. And I thought maybe the universe was giving us a second chance. Or maybe the universe has a very dark sense of humor." Danny almost smiled at that. Almost. Maybe. But here we are. Grace shook her head, trying to clear the fog of shock and confusion. "I cannot do this. I cannot spend 3 days pretending everything is fine with the man I destroyed 8 years ago." She started to stand, but his hand reached across the table. Not grabbing, just resting there. An offering. A question. 3 days, he said quietly. That is all the program requires. 3 holiday events. After that, if you never want to see me again, I will understand. Grace looked at his hand. At the faint calluses on his palms that had not been there before. At the silver watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. At the quiet confidence in his posture that was so different from the uncertain dreamer she remembered. "What happened to you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He smiled. Something wry in it. Something almost sad. "I grew up. Started a company. Sold it for enough money to buy a small island." Grace's mouth fell open. "Not that I did," he added. "Buy an island, I mean." Seemed excessive. The irony crashed over her like a wave. 8 years ago, she had ended things because she was scared. Because he had been a dreamer with no plans. An artist with no prospects. A boy who talked about changing the world, but could not change his own oil. Her mother had whispered concerns about his future. Her friends had raised eyebrows at his lack of direction. And Grace, practical, careful, terrified Grace, had listened. She had broken his heart because she did not believe he would ever become anything. And now he sat across from her, a millionaire, asking for 3 days. "You look like you have seen a ghost," Danny said. "I think I have," Grace whispered. "The ghost of every wrong decision I have ever made." The memory hit her without warning. She was 20 years old, sitting in a cramped basement room on her college campus. Folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. The smell of cheap coffee and old books. A poetry reading she had only attended because her roommate had dragged her there. And then Daniel Crawford had walked to the makeshift podium. He was gangly then, all awkward angles and nervous energy. He held a worn notebook in his hands like it contained everything that mattered in the world. And when he started to read, something inside Grace shifted. The words were about hope, about believing in things you could not see, about love that survived against impossible odds. And as he read, Grace felt her carefully constructed walls tremble for the first time. Afterward, he found her by the coffee table. "Did you hate it?" he asked. "Why would you assume I hated it?" "Because you are the only person who did not clap. I was too busy listening to clap." He smiled. That smile. And everything changed. For 2 years, Grace loved Daniel Crawford with every fiber of her being. She remembered their first kiss, under a tree during a rainstorm. Neither of them had an umbrella, and they were both soaking wet, and Daniel had said that getting drenched was worth it if it meant being close to her. She remembered nights reading poetry to each other in his tiny apartment, his dreams of changing the world, her dreams of security and stability. The way they pretended these things did not matter. She remembered the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room, the only person in the world. Like everything he had ever written was somehow about her. But slowly, the cracks appeared. Her mother's voice in her head. "He is charming, but what does he actually do?" Her friends raised eyebrows. Careful silences. Daniel's plans that never materialized. The unpaid bills. The sketchbooks full of dreams that never became reality. Grace had loved him. But love did not pay rent. Love did not build futures. Love did not quiet the voice of her mother in her head, whispering that she was too smart for this, that she deserved someone with direction. And then came the night she left. They were sitting on his apartment floor, surrounded by his sketchbooks and unpaid bills. Grace had rehearsed what she was going to say 100 times, but when the moment came, the words still cut like glass. "I cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep waiting for you to become someone." Daniel's face crumbled. Not with anger. That would have been easier. Anger she could have fought against. But this was something worse. This was understanding. "Did I not love you enough?" he asked, his voice breaking. She never answered. Because the truth was that he had loved her perfectly, completely, terrifyingly. And she had run. Now, 8 years later, Grace stared at the man across the cafe table. The man who had become everything she once said he could never be. The man she had thrown away because she was too scared to believe in him. "Grace." Danny's voice pulled her back to the present. "Where did you just go?" She blinked, shook her head. 8 years ago. That is a long way to travel in 30 seconds. It feels like yesterday. Danny set down his coffee cup. His expression shifted to something she could not quite read. 3 days, he said again. That is all I am asking for. 3 events. We get through this, help each other out, and then we go our separate ways if that is what you want. And if I say no, then I will find another match for the program, and you will have to explain to your family why you lied about having a boyfriend. Grace flinched. He knew. Of course he knew. The whole point of the program was to help people through awkward family situations. How do you know I lied? Because you signed up for a charity Christmas boyfriend program, Grace. People do not do that when they have other options. She could not argue with that. Okay, she heard herself say. 3 days. Danny's smile reached his eyes for the first time since he had walked through the door. Then let us start with lunch. The turkey club here is exceptional." And just like that, Grace Bennett agreed to spend Christmas with the millionaire she had once thrown away for being worthless. She had no idea that in 3 days, she would have to face not just her past, but every lie she had ever told herself about love, fear, and the price of playing it safe. The first event was a tree lighting ceremony in the town square. Grace spent the entire walk there hyper-aware of Danny's presence beside her. The way he shortened his steps to match hers. The way he occasionally brushed snow off her coat with casual intimacy. The way he made her laugh with ridiculous stories about his time living in San Francisco. "So the investor looked at me," Danny said, gesturing dramatically as they walked, "and asked if I knew that my business model was, quote, absolute chaos dressed in a nice font. And I said, 'Sir, that is the nicest thing anyone has ever said about me.'" Grace laughed despite herself. "And he invested? $2 million. Danny shrugged. "Turns out chaos sells." The tree lighting ceremony was beautiful. Hartwick's town square was covered in fresh snow, the street lamps wrapped in garlands and lights. Hundreds of people had gathered around the massive Christmas tree in the center, families with children, couples holding hands, elderly pairs who had probably been coming to this ceremony for decades. Grace found herself standing close to Danny, close enough to smell his cologne. Something warm and woody that made her think of fireplace nights and whispered promises. The mayor gave a short speech. The children from the local elementary school sang a slightly off-key rendition of Silent Night. And then, with a countdown from 10, the tree blazed to life. Hundreds of tiny lights flickered against the dark December sky like captured stars. Children gasped. Couples embraced. And Grace, despite everything, felt something stir in her chest. Something she had not felt in a very long time. "I thought about you," Danny said quietly, his eyes still on the tree. Grace's throat tightened. "Danny, after you left, I thought about you every day for 2 years." She did not know what to say, did not know if there was anything to say. "And then I made myself stop," he continued. "I told myself you were right, that I was going nowhere, that you deserved someone stable, someone with a plan." He turned to look at her, and in the glow of the Christmas lights, his face held no accusation, only truth. "So I became someone stable, someone with a plan." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. "Did you do all of that because of me?" "No." His voice was gentle. "I did it for me. Because you showed me who I did not want to be anymore. Someone who could not take care of the people he loved." All those years, Grace had told herself she had made the right choice. Protected herself from uncertainty. Chosen security over chaos. But standing here, watching Danny smile at a child who was pointing excitedly at the tree, she wondered if she had actually chosen fear over love. Have you ever realized too late that the person you pushed away was the person you needed most? Drop a comment below and tell me. What would you do if you got a second chance? The second event was Grace's best friend Maggie's holiday party. Maggie had decorated her small apartment with enough tinsel to supply a Broadway production. Warm lights hung from every available surface. Holiday music played from a speaker that kept cutting out at odd moments. And the guests, Maggie's eclectic collection of friends and acquaintances, immediately gravitating toward Danny like moths to a particularly charming flame. Within 20 minutes, Danny had charmed half the room. He remembered names. He asked real questions. He made a shy teenager feel like her opinions mattered and helped an elderly woman find a seat. He laughed at jokes that were not particularly funny and listened to stories that went on too long. Grace watched from across the room, wine glass clutched too tightly, something aching in her chest. She remembered the poetry reading where they had met. The first kiss in the rain. The nights reading to each other. The way he used to look at her. The way he still looked at her. And she remembered the night she had left. Daniel's face crumbling. His voice breaking. Did I not love you enough? She had never answered. Because the truth was that he had loved her perfectly. Completely. Terrifyingly. And she had run. You were staring. Grace blinked. Maggie had appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of wine. I am not staring. You absolutely are. Maggie handed her a fresh glass. Also, who is that gorgeous man? And why did you not tell me you were bringing someone who looks like he walked out of a holiday romance novel? Grace took a long sip of wine. It is complicated. Complicated how? He is Daniel Crawford. Maggie's eyes widened so dramatically that Grace worried they might actually fall out of her head. The Daniel Crawford? The one you cried over for 6 months? The one you said letting go was the biggest mistake of your life? The same. And he is here, as your date, at my Christmas party. Life is strange. Life is a freaking Hallmark movie. Maggie grabbed Grace's arm. How did this happen? Grace explained. The charity program. The $5. The moment she saw him walk through the cafe door and realized what she had done. Maggie stared at her for a long moment, processing. Then she looked across the room at Danny, who was now helping Maggie's elderly neighbor fix the clasp on her necklace. He seems different, Maggie said quietly. He is different. Grace set down her wine glass. And I do not know what to do about it. Maggie squeezed her arm. Maybe you do not have to do anything. Maybe you just have to feel. Feeling is what got me into this mess. No. Maggie's voice was soft but firm. Running from feeling is what got you into this mess. There is a difference. The drive home from Maggie's party was quiet. Snow fell outside the car windows. The radio played soft Christmas music, and the weight of everything unspoken sat between them like a third passenger. Danny, Grace finally said, gathering every ounce of courage she had. About what happened 8 years ago. Do not. His voice was gentle but firm. What? Not yet. I am not ready for that conversation. Grace felt her heart sink. Then when I know this is not just guilt. When I know you actually see me. Not just the mistakes you made. Silence. The snow kept falling. I was angry for a long time, Danny admitted, his eyes on the road. I told myself you were shallow. That you only cared about money and status. It was easier than admitting the truth. What truth? He was quiet for a moment. That I was not enough for you. Not because of money, but because I had not figured out who I was yet. Grace felt something break open inside her chest. All this time, she had been so focused on her own guilt, her own regret, that she had never stopped to think about what her leaving had done to him. How it had shaped him. How it had wounded him. Danny, we are here. He pulled up in front of her apartment building. The snow was falling harder now, coating everything in white. Grace did not move to get out of the car. Why did you really move back to Hartwick? Why did you volunteer for that program? Danny was quiet for a long moment. I told you. The universe gave us a second chance. That is not an answer. No. He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. It is not. He got out of the car and walked around to open her door. They walked to her apartment entrance in silence, snowflakes swirling around them. At the door, Danny reached out and brushed a snowflake from her hair. His fingers lingered for just a moment. Their eyes met. The air between them crackled with 8 years of unspoken words. And then he stepped back. One more event, he said. Christmas Eve. Your family. You do not have to do that. My family is a lot. My mother, my aunt, my cousin who will definitely look you up online. I know, but I want to. He paused, something shifting in his expression. I want them to see who you chose, even if it was only for 3 days. He turned and walked back to his car, leaving Grace standing in the snow, heart racing, completely unsure if she was falling in love again or falling into the biggest heartbreak of her life. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived too fast. Grace stood in front of her closet, having already changed outfits 3 times. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt adequate for the task ahead. She was about to walk into her family home with the man she had destroyed 8 years ago, pretend everything was normal, and somehow survive whatever was about to happen. Her phone rang. Her mother. Grace, sweetheart. I just wanted to make sure you were still coming. Of course I am coming, Mom. And you are bringing this mysterious boyfriend. Yes, Mom. I hope he is prepared. Aunt Mildred has been sharpening her questions since Thanksgiving. She is convinced there is something you are not telling us. There was so much Grace was not telling them. So much she could never tell them. He can handle it, Mom. We will see. Danny arrived at noon. He was wearing a dark blazer that made his shoulders look impossibly broad and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He was holding flowers for her mother and a small wrapped gift. You bought my mother flowers? Grace stared at him. And a gift for your great aunt. Maggie mentioned she collects vintage brooches. How did you even? When did you? I pay attention, Grace. His voice softened. I always did. They drove to the Bennett family home in mostly silence. Grace's hands shook slightly against her lap. Danny's calm felt almost oppressive. Hey. He reached over and took her hand. His palm was warm and steady. Whatever happens in there, I have got you. That is what fake Christmas boyfriends are for. Grace almost laughed. Almost. What if they figure out this is fake? He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Is it? Before she could answer, they pulled into the driveway of her childhood home. Christmas lights wrapped around every surface. Cars already parked along the street. The sound of laughter and music drifting through the cold air. Grace took a deep breath. Ready? I have been ready for 8 years, Danny said quietly. The question is, are you? She did not have an answer. But she opened the car door anyway. Whatever was about to happen, there was no going back now. The Bennett family home was exactly as Grace remembered it. Warm yellow lights spilling from every window. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifting through the cold air. Christmas music playing from somewhere inside, mixing with the sound of laughter and conversation. It was the kind of home that looked perfect from the outside. The kind of home that made strangers walking by feel a pang of longing for something they could not quite name. But Grace knew the truth. She knew the pressure that lived inside those walls. The expectations that hung from every carefully placed decoration. The silent judgments that passed between smiles and hugs. Her mother opened the door before they even reached the porch. Grace, sweetheart. She pulled her daughter into a hug that was equal parts warmth and assessment. Then her eyes moved to Danny, scanning him with the precision of a jeweler examining a diamond. So this is the mysterious boyfriend. Grace has been very secretive about you. Danny smiled. That charming, disarming smile that Grace remembered from 1,000 moments. All good things take time to reveal, Mrs. Bennett. Your home is beautiful. I can see where Grace gets her eye for detail. Grace watched her mother soften by approximately 40%. It was remarkable, really. Danny had been in the house for less than 30 seconds, and he was already winning. Please, come in. Everyone is dying to meet you. Everyone turned out to be a lot of people. Grace's brother was there with his new fiancée, a petite woman with a nervous laugh who kept touching her engagement ring like she was afraid it might disappear. Her cousin Stephanie was holding court in the living room, her own fiancé standing beside her with the glazed expression of a man who had heard these stories many times before. Aunts and uncles filled every available chair. Cousins Grace barely recognized milled around the food table. And in the corner, seated in her usual throne-like armchair, was Great Aunt Mildred. Mildred was 83 years old and had the eyes of a hawk and the tongue of a razor. She had been married 3 times, buried 2 husbands, and divorced 1, and had opinions about everything, especially the romantic choices of her younger relatives. She looked at Danny the moment he walked in, and Grace saw something flicker in her ancient eyes. Recognition, maybe, or suspicion, or both. Grace, darling. Her mother was already steering them toward the living room. Introduce your young man to everyone. The next hour was a gauntlet. What do you do for a living? Danny answered vaguely about investments and consulting, never quite lying, but never quite telling the whole truth either. Where did you two meet? Grace and Danny exchanged a glance loaded with 8 years of complicated history. Through a mutual friend, Grace said. It was not entirely untrue. What are your intentions? Danny handled that one with grace. I intend to make sure Grace knows how valued she is, he said. Every single day? Grace's mother practically melted. Her cousin Stephanie was less impressed. She kept looking at Danny with narrowed eyes, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she could not quite figure out. So, Grace finally found someone Stephanie said during a lull in conversation. We were starting to wonder if she had given up entirely. The words were delivered with a smile, but Grace felt them like tiny knives. Danny's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Grace did not find me. I found her, and I had been looking for 8 years. The room went quiet. Grace stared at him. He had said it so casually, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. But the weight of those words hung in the air, heavy with meaning that only the two of them understood. Stephanie opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, dinner was announced. The dining room was beautiful. The long table was set with Grace's grandmother's china, the good silver, candles flickering in crystal holders. Everyone took their seats with the practiced choreography of a family that had done this 100 times before. Grace sat next to Danny, their shoulders almost touching. Across from them, her mother watched with barely concealed hope. At the head of the table, Great Aunt Mildred observed everything with those sharp, knowing eyes. The food was passed. Conversations overlapped. Grace's brother talked about his wedding plans. Stephanie talked about her upcoming honeymoon. The adults discussed politics and weather and the price of everything. And through it all, Grace felt Danny's presence beside her like a steady flame. Every time their hands brushed reaching for the same dish, every time their eyes met across a crowded moment, she felt the years collapse, felt herself falling back into something she had tried so hard to forget. The main course was nearly finished when Great Aunt Mildred set down her fork. The sound was small, just metal against china, but something about the deliberation of the movement made everyone pause. Conversations trailed off. Eyes turned toward the elderly woman in her throne at the end of the table. "Young man," Mildred said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She peered at Danny over her glasses, and Grace felt her heart stop. "I have a question for you." Danny set down his own fork. "Of course. I have watched you all evening. You are charming. Polite. You say all the right things." Mildred paused. "But I am old, and I have learned that charming men are often hiding something." Grace's mother shifted uncomfortably. "Aunt Mildred, perhaps this is not the time." "It is exactly the time," Mildred said, not taking her eyes off Danny. "So I will ask you directly, young man, do you love my great niece?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. The moment everything would fall apart. Danny would give some diplomatic non-answer, and Mildred would see right through it, and the whole charade would crumble. But Danny did not give a diplomatic non-answer. Instead, he turned to look at Grace. Really looked at her, the way he used to, the way that made her feel like the only person in the universe. "I have loved Grace Bennett," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent table, "since the moment I met her." Grace could not breathe. "I loved her when I had nothing. When I was just a dreamer with a notebook full of poetry and no idea how to make my way in the world." The room was absolutely still. No one moved. No one spoke. "I loved her when she left. I loved her every day we were apart, even when I tried not to, even when I told myself I should move on, even when I built a life that was supposed to help me forget her." He paused, and Grace felt the entire room hold its breath. "And if she will let me, I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure she never doubts that love again." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. And then Grace's mother burst into tears. Not sad tears. Happy tears. The kind of tears that come when you have been hoping for something for so long that you had almost given up, and then suddenly it appears in front of you, more beautiful than you ever imagined. "Oh my goodness," her mother gasped, reaching for a napkin. "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Great Aunt Mildred leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "He will do," she announced. "This one will do." The table erupted. Grace's brother was clapping Danny on the shoulder. Her cousin's fiancé was pouring more wine. Someone was already talking about wedding dates. But Grace could not hear any of it. She was still staring at Danny, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. He had meant it. Every word. She could see it in his eyes. This was not pretend. This was not part of the charity program. This was real, and that terrified her more than anything. The chaos of the moment might have continued indefinitely, but then Grace's cousin Stephanie pulled out her phone. "Wait a minute," Stephanie said, her perfectly manicured fingers flying across the screen. "Daniel Crawford. Why do I know that name?" The room went quiet again. Grace felt her stomach drop. "Oh my God." Stephanie's eyes went wide. "He is that Daniel Crawford, the tech entrepreneur. He sold his company last year for—" She stopped, staring at the number on her screen. "Grace, your boyfriend is a multimillionaire." The silence that followed was different from before. This was not the warm silence of romantic declarations. This was the cold silence of shock and calculation. Grace's mother looked between them, confusion and hope and something like suspicion warring on her face. "Grace," her mother said slowly, "did you know about this?" "Yes," Grace whispered. "But that is not why I am with him. That is not why any of this happened." "And you are the Daniel Crawford she dated in college?" Her mother's voice was sharper now. "The one she broke up with? The one we all thought was going nowhere?" The room went very, very quiet. Everyone knew. Everyone remembered. Grace had told her mother about Daniel back then, had listened to her mother's concerns about his lack of direction, had let those concerns become her own fears. And now everyone was putting the pieces together. Danny looked at Grace, his expression unreadable. "The one she left." "Yes. So let me understand this," Stephanie said, a cruel edge creeping into her voice. "Grace dumped you because you were a broke dreamer. Then you became a millionaire. And now suddenly she is interested again." "That is not what happened," Grace said, but her voice came out weak, unconvincing, even to her own ears. "Really? Because it looks like you hit the lottery, Grace. You dumped him when he had nothing, and now you are reaping the rewards of his success." How convenient. The words hit Grace like physical blows. Because the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that Stephanie was voicing exactly what Grace had been afraid everyone would think. "That is enough." Danny's voice was sharp, harder than Grace had ever heard it. "You do not know anything about what happened between us." "I know what I see," Stephanie shot back. "My cousin rejected you, and now you are rich, and suddenly she is all over you." It does not take a genius to connect the dots. Grace stood up, so suddenly her chair scraped against the floor. "Excuse me," she managed, and then she was walking. Out of the dining room, through the kitchen, onto the back porch where the cold December air hit her like a wall. She could not breathe, could not think. 8 years of carefully constructed denial were crumbling around her, and everyone she loved had just witnessed the collapse. The worst part was that she could not even argue with Stephanie's interpretation. Because how was this any different from what Grace had done 8 years ago? She had left Daniel because she did not believe in him. And now she was back, and he was rich. And what did that say about her? What did that say about everything? The back porch was quiet. Snow was falling softly, covering the backyard in fresh white. Christmas lights from the neighbors' houses twinkled in the darkness. The muffled sounds of family chaos drifted through the windows behind her. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the cold. She had not grabbed her coat, had not thought about anything except escape. The door opened behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Danny stepped onto the porch, closing the door softly behind him. He did not say anything, just stood there, a few feet away, waiting. "I am sorry," Grace said finally, her voice breaking. "For leaving. For not believing in you. For being so scared of uncertainty that I destroyed the best thing in my life." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I told myself I was being practical, smart. That love was not enough without security. But the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified of loving someone who might fail. Terrified of taking a risk. Terrified of my mother's voice in my head telling me I deserved better." She took a shaky breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "You were enough, Daniel. You were always enough. I was the one who was not brave enough to believe it." Danny did not move, did not speak, Just watched her with those eyes that had always seen too much. And now everyone in there thinks I am only here because you are rich. They think I am some kind of gold digger who is taking advantage of your success. And I cannot even argue with them, because how do I explain that I found you through a $5 charity program? How do I explain that I did not even know it was you until you walked through that cafe door? She was crying harder now. Ugly crying. The kind of crying she had not allowed herself in years. I ruined everything, Danny. I ruined it 8 years ago, and I am ruining it again now. That is what I do. I destroy everything good in my life because I am too scared to hold on to it. Danny finally moved. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the snowflakes landing on his dark hair, melting against the warmth of his skin. Are you done? He asked quietly. Grace blinked. What? Are you done beating yourself up? Because I have something to say, and I have been waiting 8 years to say it. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Danny took a deep breath. I was angry for a long time. I told myself you were shallow, that you only cared about money and status. It was easier than admitting the truth. What truth? That I was not enough for you. Not because of money or success, but because I had not figured out who I was yet. He stepped even closer. You leaving forced me to become someone I could be proud of. Someone worthy of love. You were always worthy of love, Daniel. Danny. She smiled through her tears. Danny. He reached out and took her hands in his. They were warm despite the cold. Steady despite everything. I did not buy my way into that program to manipulate you, he said. I did it because I needed to know. After everything I built, after all the success and the money and the supposed making it, I still thought about you. Every single day. Grace felt her heart crack open. I came back to Hartwick because I needed to know if there was anything left. If you still felt something. Or if I had spent 8 years chasing a ghost. I feel everything, Grace whispered. I never stopped feeling everything. Danny stepped closer still, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He brushed a snowflake from her hair, his fingers lingering against her cheek. So what happens now? Grace asked. Danny smiled. That same devastating smile she had fallen in love with 8 years ago. The one that had haunted her dreams ever since. Now I kiss the woman I never stopped loving. And then we figure out the rest together. And when he kissed her, there in the snow, with Christmas lights twinkling and her family definitely watching through the window, Grace felt something she had not felt in 8 years. She felt home. Inside the house, Grace's mother was crying again, this time with joy. Great Aunt Mildred was nodding sagely. I knew it. I knew there was history there. Grace's brother was already opening champagne. And Stephanie was conspicuously silent, her earlier cruelty now looking very small in the face of something so obviously real. The door opened, and Danny and Grace walked back inside, hand in hand, snowflakes melting in their hair. Well, Great Aunt Mildred announced, I believe we have a love story to celebrate. Someone pour these two some champagne. The rest of Christmas Eve passed in a blur of warmth and laughter, and something Grace had not felt in her family home for years, acceptance. She told them everything. The charity program. The $5. The moment of recognition in the cafe. The 3 events that had become something real. Her mother cried 3 more times. Her brother made increasingly terrible jokes about expensive Christmas presents. And Great Aunt Mildred pulled Danny aside for what Grace could only assume was either a threat or a blessing, possibly both. When they finally left, hours later, the snow had stopped falling. The sky was clear and full of stars. And Grace felt lighter than she had in 8 years. That was something, Danny said as they walked to his car. That was everything, Grace corrected. You handled my family. You survived, Aunt Mildred. You told them you loved me in front of everyone. I meant every word. I know. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I know you did. They stood there in the driveway of her childhood home, the same driveway where she had learned to ride a bike, where her father had taught her to drive, where so many memories lived. What happens now? She asked. The program is over. The 3 events are done. This is not pretend anymore. It was never pretend for me, Danny said quietly. From the moment I saw your name on that list, I knew I was not signing up for a charity program. I was signing up for a second chance. And if I had rejected you, if I had walked out of that cafe and never looked back, then at least I would have known. At least I would have had an answer instead of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. Grace looked at him, at the man he had become, at the boy he had been, at the love that had somehow survived 8 years of silence and distance and regret. No more running, she said. I am done running, and I am done letting you go. He kissed her again, and this time it felt like a promise, like a beginning, like everything she had been afraid to want for so long. The wedding was the following December, exactly 1 year from the day Grace had walked into the Hartwick Community Center with a crumpled $5 bill and a desperate prayer. They held it in the same community center where it had all begun. The Christmas boyfriend program was still running, and Grace had insisted on making a donation. Considerably more than $5 this time. The decorations were simple, white lights and winter flowers. The guest list was small, just family and close friends. Maggie was the maid of honor, still claiming that she had called it from the moment she saw them together at her holiday party. Grace's mother sat in the front row, already crying before the ceremony even began. Great Aunt Mildred sat beside her, wearing one of her vintage brooches and a look of satisfied approval. And at the altar, Danny waited. He wore a simple dark suit, and he was smiling. That same smile she had fallen in love with in a cramped basement room 8 years ago. The same smile that had found her again in a cafe on a snowy December day. When Grace walked down the aisle, she was not thinking about the past, not thinking about the mistakes or the regrets or the years they had lost. She was thinking about the future, the life they would build together, the love that had survived against all odds. Danny took her hands, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, years of history passing between them in silence. Then Danny smiled. You know, I have always wondered what the going rate for a husband is. Grace laughed. Priceless, but I got a discount. The officiant cleared his throat. Shall we begin? They had written their own vows. Danny went first. Grace Bennett, he said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. 8 years ago, you broke my heart, and for a long time, I thought that was the end of our story. He paused, squeezing her hands. But it was not the end. It was the beginning. Because losing you taught me who I wanted to become. Fighting to be worthy of you gave me a purpose I never had before. And finding you again showed me that some loves do not die. They wait. They survive. They grow stronger in the silence. Grace felt tears streaming down her face. She did not bother to wipe them away. I promise to remind you every day that you are enough. That you always were. That the $5 you spent on me was the best investment you ever made. The guests laughed through their own tears. Grace took a shaky breath. Daniel Crawford. Danny. He smiled at the correction. 8 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let fear convince me that love was not enough. I let other people's expectations become my own. I let you go because I was too scared to hold on. She looked into his eyes. Those same eyes that had always seen her. Really seen her. But you came back. You gave me a second chance I did not deserve. You showed me that the boy I fell in love with and the man you became are the same person. Just braver. Just stronger. Just more patient than I had any right to expect. She squeezed his hands. I promise to never run again. To choose love over fear. To believe in us, even when believing feels impossible. And I promise to spend the rest of my life being grateful for the miracle of finding you twice. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Danny did not need to be told twice. When they kissed, the small crowd erupted. Grace's mother was sobbing. Her brother was cheering. Great Aunt Mildred was nodding with satisfaction, murmuring something about finally getting it right. And Maggie was already on her phone, posting pictures with captions about best friends finding their happily ever after. The reception was held right there in the community center, the same room where the Christmas boyfriend sign-up table had been exactly 1 year before. Grace insisted on keeping the original table in the corner. A little sign next to it read, where it all began. $5, one broken heart, 1 second chance. During the toasts, Maggie told the entire story. The crumpled $5 bill, the cafe recognition, the tree lighting and the holiday party, and the disaster of Christmas dinner. Everyone laughed and cried and marveled at the impossibility of it all. Great Aunt Mildred gave a toast that was part blessing, part warning. "Young man," she said to Danny, "I have buried 2 husbands and divorced 1. I know what it takes to make a marriage last. Do not make me regret giving you my approval." Danny raised his glass. "I would not dream of it." Later, during the first dance, Danny held Grace close and whispered in her ear, "Do you remember what you asked me in the car? On the way to your parents' house." Grace thought back. "I asked if this was fake, if what we were doing was real. And I asked if it was. You never answered." Danny smiled. "I think I just did." They danced slowly, the room spinning around them, the lights twinkling like the stars that had witnessed their first kiss so many years ago. "I love you," Grace said. "I should have said it 8 years ago. I should have said it every day since. But I love you." "I know," Danny replied. "I have always known. Even when you could not say it. Even when you were running. I knew." "How?" "Because I felt the same way. And love like that, real love, you can feel it even when the other person is too scared to say it out loud." Grace rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady. Strong. Home. Years later, when people asked Grace how she met her husband, she would smile and say she bought him at a charity auction. And Danny would add that it was the best return on investment she ever made. Because love, they had learned, was not about timing or circumstances or who someone used to be. It was not about waiting until you were ready or waiting until the other person had proven themselves worthy. Love was about showing up. It was about forgiveness. It was about being brave enough to try, even when you were terrified. It was about believing that sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, even when you are only willing to pay $5 for it. Grace had spent 28 years building walls, playing it safe, choosing certainty over chaos, security over love, fear over faith. She had pushed away the one person who had ever truly seen her, because she was too scared to believe in him, too scared to believe in herself, too scared to take a risk on something as uncertain as love. And then, with 5 crumpled dollars and a desperate prayer, she had accidentally found her way back to everything she had lost. The boy who became a man, the dreamer who became a success, the love she had thrown away, wrapped up in a charity auction, waiting for her all along. Some people spend their whole lives looking for love in all the wrong places. They search for perfection, for certainty, for someone who fits all the boxes and checks all the lists. But real love does not come in neat packages. Real love is messy and complicated and terrifying. Real love asks you to take a risk, to believe in something you cannot control, to trust someone else with your heart, knowing they could break it. Grace had learned that lesson the hard way. She had lost 8 years because she was too afraid to take a chance on a dreamer, too afraid to believe that love could be enough. But she had also learned something else, something more important. She had learned that it is never too late. It is never too late to say sorry. It is never too late to say I love you. It is never too late to take a chance on the person who makes your heart beat faster. Because sometimes the universe gives you a second chance. Sometimes the person you let go comes back into your life, changed and grown and ready to try again. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can run, like you did before. Or you can stay. You can be brave. You can believe. If this story touched you, drop a comment below and tell me. What would you do if the person you let go came back into your life? Would you take the risk? Would you have the courage to love again? And if you want more stories about second chances, unexpected love, and the magic of believing in someone, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because sometimes the best stories are the ones we almost missed. Until next time, remember this. Love is not about being certain. It is about being brave enough to try. It is about choosing someone every single day, even when you are scared. It is about believing that the $5 gamble might just be the best investment you ever make. Grace and Danny Crawford celebrate Christmas every year in the same community center where they found each other again. They always make a donation to the Children's Hospital program, and they always leave a note for the next person who is desperate enough to try, for the next person who is scared enough to hope, for the next person who is brave enough to believe that love, real love, is always worth the risk, even if it only costs $5, even if it changes everything, even if it brings you home.